Hello everyone, welcome to the 3.2 video. The objective for today is that we are going to read chapters 2 and 3 of While the Locust Slept, and you're going to start analyzing characters through page 44. So please have your packet out so you are ready to take some notes as you watch this video. The first thing I want to talk about is this term memoir. I told you before that While the Locust Slept is an example of a memoir, and that means that the genre of this book is memoir. Remember, genre means like the category or the type of story that this is. Memoir means a non-fiction book about the author's own life. So that means that memoirs are true stories, and they're telling the story of the author. So our book, While the Locust Slept, is Peter Razor writing about his life story. You might have also heard the term autobiography, which means something very similar. That is also a true story about the author's life. Autobiography tends to span someone's whole life, from when they were born up until when they're old. Memoir tends to focus on a specific section of someone's life. And so While the Locust Slept is telling us the true story of Peter Razor's childhood, from when he's born until he's about 17, 18 years old. The next thing I want to talk about is characterization. So when we start reading a new story or a new book, we start off knowing nothing about the different people involved in the story. And we learn about the people through characterization. Characterization is just a fancy way to describe the way characters are described or represented. Some ways that we learn about characterization are the physical description. So how does the character look? How old are they? We also learn about characterization through what the character says and what the character does. So how do they interact with other people? What do they say to other people? How do they make other people feel? These are all things that teach us really important things about the characters. We also want to look at what other people say about them in order to understand the character better. I want to talk about an example of characterization from the play we read this fall, A Raisin in the Sun. When we started reading A Raisin in the Sun, we didn't know anything about the characters, right? But we learned about Walter and his family through the way that they were described and represented. So at the beginning of the play, we got this physical description that told us Walter is a lean, intense young man in his middle 30s, inclined to quick, nervous movements and erratic speech habits. So that was the physical description that started to paint a picture of who Walter is for us. We learned that he's lean, that means kind of skinny, he's intense, he's in his mid-30s, he's nervous, he's erratic. So this really starts to build Walter's character in our mind. And then we get more characterization by what Walter does. Here it says Walter slams the table and jumps up, and through what Walter says. Remember this scene when Ruth cooked Walter eggs, and Walter ends up screaming at her and says, "Damn my eggs, damn all the eggs that ever was." So through these actions and through the things that Walter's saying here, we learn a lot. We learn that there's tension and conflict in his relationship with Ruth. We learned that he's someone who has really big emotions and a lot of anger. So this is an example here of characterization and how we learn about characters while we read. Another way that we can understand characters in a story is by looking at the protagonist and the antagonist. You might recognize these terms, but let's review what they mean. The protagonist is the main character of a story, the person that we're rooting for, that we want to succeed. And the antagonist is a person or a thing that keeps the protagonist from achieving their goals, from succeeding, from being happy. So if we think about the play A Raisin in the Sun, let's think about some antagonists from A Raisin in the Sun. Willie Harris, remember that was the character who stole all of the money when Walter wanted to invest in the liquor store. So Willie is clearly an antagonist because he took the money, he kept Walter from achieving his dream of the liquor store. We can also think about the character of Walter himself as an antagonist because remember, he's the one that invested the money and then lost the money. And so for a time, he was the thing keeping Beneatha from going to medical school, from keeping the family from being able to afford their dreams. And then the antagonist is not only, it doesn't have to be a person, it can also be a thing, right? And so poverty and racism are also antagonists in A Raisin in the Sun because they hold the family back and they keep the younger family from fully achieving their dreams. In the book that we have just started reading, I know we've only read chapter 1, but I want you to think a little bit about protagonist and antagonist in While the Locust Slept. Our protagonist is the author Peter Raiser himself. And so what about the antagonist? Who or what is standing in Peter's way of being successful and happy and achieving his goals? Some antagonists in the book so far, we can think about the state public school at Owatonna. Remember, that is just a name for like the orphanage that Peter is staying at because his family is not taking care of him. So think about the ways that that school is maybe not a good place for Peter to be. We also just met the character John Shawls. That is the farmer that Peter is going to go live and work for. We're about to learn more about him in chapters 2 and 3, and I want you to pay attention to how John speaks, how John acts, and how this makes him an antagonist. We've also seen a glimpse of how racism is going to be an antagonist for Peter. We saw that his teacher at school was prejudiced against him for being Native American, and I want you to pay attention to the way that racism is acting as an antagonist throughout this book. So as you start reading chapters 2 and 3, I want you to really watch for how Peter, his antagonists, and other people in the book are characterized. Enjoy.